Hi guys, my name is Karthik and I am from exitautomation.com, and today we are going to talk about automation testing patterns in our EA Weekly. Alright, so let's get started. Automation testing patterns. We have been discussing about automation testing tools and technologies and many different languages in automation testing. And also we discussed a lot of different automation testing methodologies. And once again, I have seen people confusing the automation testing patterns with automation testing methodologies. I have seen people confusing keyword-driven testing and hybrid testing or data-driven testing with singleton patterns or page object model patterns, something like that. And similarly, hybrid testing or keyword-driven testing are otherwise called as methodologies of testings, whereas singleton patterns, Fluent Pattern, or page object model patterns, or these kinds of steps are actually called as patterns. So patterns is different, methodologies are different. So they are completely two different things, and please don't confuse both of them together. And so we have been looking at many different patterns in our automation testing discussions in our Exit Automation Weekly as well as in Exit Automation YouTube channels and Udemy courses. But we have not talked about the patterns as a title altogether, but we have discussed about pattern internally while we were discussing about these automation testing tools and technologies within our courses. For instance, we have discussed about the page object model pattern a lot in our course, and you have seen a lot of my videos in YouTube, not just for Selenium, even for Protractor or Xamarin or Appium or even Cypress. We have discussed about page object model pattern a lot. So we know the advantages of page object model pattern a lot, and we have been looking at page object model pattern a lot more in our Exit Automation channel. And again, I don't really have to take this discussion for this particular video because we have discussed about it a lot. And there are many different automation testing patterns available, and some of the most commonly available patterns are like factory patterns, singleton patterns, and fluent patterns. And we are not really going to get into deep of all these patterns, and we're going to be discussing about them like a programming fashion, but we are going to take one among the pattern which is kind of very interesting than compared to other patterns, because we have discussed already about these patterns in our Udemy courses or YouTube channel courses. So let's talk about some of the patterns available within automation testing. For instance, factory patterns. So the factory pattern is a design pattern which defines an interface for creating an object, but lets the classes that implements the interface decide which class to instantiate. So the factory pattern lets the class postpone instantiation to subclasses. The factory patterns are used to replace the class constructors, abstracting the process of object generation so that the type of object instantiated can be determined at the runtime. So for the factory pattern, we have already discussed about what is called as a page factory.init element method in our page object model code that we have discussed in our YouTube channel in many different courses. So you might have seen, like most of the times while you start working with a page object model, so you instantiate internally, there is a factory pattern available, which is nothing but the page factory.init element. So you just put page factory.init elements. So it's a factory pattern, guys. Basically, you instantiate a type based on passing the type within that particular method init element, so that the init element will decide which subclass to instantiate so that it can be the actual type for that particular class. So this is one of the factory pattern design which we can implement within our automation testing. So we don't really have to necessarily implement these kinds of model in the automation testing world, because we can just leverage the power of existing technologies, and it is not necessary that we have to implement these kinds of factory pattern or strict pattern for our automation testing, but we can use those good practices or methodologies, and understanding these patterns will really help and bring the benefit for automation testing world. And the next pattern that we'll be discussing is the singleton pattern. Again, the singleton pattern is very common among the automation testing world, and again, these are some of the patterns which is brought directly from the programming languages world, where the developers actually uses that. But again, singleton pattern, you can use it for your testing as well. So some of the examples of singleton pattern is while working with the WebDriver, you actually have to use the same object from one class to another class or within the whole project so that it can be executed within one browser instance, that is the WebDriver instance. So the Singleton pattern is also one of the most popular pattern among the community. So the Singleton pattern is one of the best known pattern in software engineering. Essentially, a singleton is a class which allows a single instance of itself to be created and usually gives simple access to that instance. So that's the power of singleton, guys. Again, you just create one object and then it has to be carried over across the whole project until the lifespan of the execution of that whole program. So that's really cool, because that's exactly what we really require while working with our automation testing with the browsers with WebDriver instances. And the next pattern that we'll be discussing about is the Fluent pattern. And again, Fluent pattern is something which is coined by Martin Fowler and Evan, which is a method for designing object-oriented API based extensively on method chaining with goal of making readability of the source code close to that of an ordinary written prose, essentially creating a domain-specific language within the interface. Again, this is very cool to see that the Fluent interface or the Fluent pattern we have already implemented in our advanced framework development with Selenium Java course while we were working with the custom controls. So the custom controls, while we were designing within our course, we told that the Fluent pattern is something very interesting, because you can directly use the Fluent pattern to perform an action based upon the chainings. Again, in these kind of chaining mechanism you can achieve very easily using this Fluent pattern. And again, Fluent pattern is something that we'll be discussing in this particular demonstration, where it is going to be something that we can literally implement within our code and we can see the benefit out of it and how readable it is while you work with a Fluent pattern. So these are the different types of patterns available in automation testing world, something like singleton, Fluent patterns, factory patterns, page object model patterns, and there are even many different patterns available which are not most commonly being used, but they are very interesting to work with. And once again, the next question comes among the community is, do we really require to follow these patterns while we implement the automation framework? But again, the question is going to be for you. If you're going to be creating a best designed automation framework, then you probably need to follow some of the basic software principles, which is going to be making your software framework more better, robust, and that's going to be something that you can use or even communicate within your team much easily to follow the principles and practices that what you really need to be achieved within your community and within your company, within your peers that you're working with. Because if you don't really have a standard patterns within your framework, then probably you'll be ending up asking them to say that this is what you require as a documentation, but you don't really have a guidelines of how to achieve that. But these proven patterns are something which is going to be very handy while you are going to carry forward within your organization to perform an action of framework development much easily. So these are the different patterns available, guys. So let's quickly jump into a machine and discuss about the Fluent pattern, and we'll understand how things work. So today we are going to be discussing about the comparison of the page object model pattern, and we are going to be discussing about the Fluent pattern. So as you can see here with the page object model pattern that we have, basically we are writing all the methods something like this. As you can see, this is the code which is sitting in my Execute Automation GitHub repo in Selenium with SpecFlow repository, where you can find that I actually have something called as a SpecFlow parallel test execution, where you have this pages, where within this page we store all the page object model elements, something like this. It's like a very good pattern where you initialize the page using the elements that you have got, and then you can also do something like writing a method to handle certain situations, something like entering username and password in the method, similarly clicking a login button, something like this as a method. So this way it's like a pattern that we are following to perform an operation. But again, there was a pattern where we were using this page factory.init element to initialize all the elements, but somehow the page factory.init element has been deprecated after Selenium 3.10, so we're not using that anymore. But these are the patterns that we were following with the page object model. and this is how you just call these particular pages, like login page is equal to new login page, and then we pass in the driver, and then we perform these kind of operation, right? So this is how we write the page object model pattern with Selenium. But the next pattern that we are going to be discussing today is not the page object model pattern, because we have discussed a lot about POM in my Exit Automation YouTube channel as well as in Udemy courses. So rather, today we are going to be discussing about the Fluent pattern or the Fluent interface pattern. So in order for that, I'm just going to open my Visual Studio, and I'm going to be creating a very super simple test project this time. So I'm just going to choose the unit test project, .NET Framework, and then I'm going to call this as Fluent Test Demo. And here within this particular unit test, I'm going to be writing a very different sort of operation. But before that, I'm going to be creating the pages, pretty much like how you saw in my previous demonstration. But before that, I'm just going to be adding the reference for both the WebDriver as well as system.tuples. So you'll understand why I'm trying to add the system.tuples later. But as of now, just bear with me like what I'm trying to do here. So I'm just going to go to the browse, and I'm going to search for WebDriver. I'm going to install that. And then system.value tuples, which is from Microsoft. So I'm just going to install that. All right. So once this is done, I'm going to create a folder here. I'm going to call this as pages, pretty much like how we do in the page object model. And within this pages, I'm going to create two files. The one is the homepage.cs, and the another file is called as loginpage.cs. So as you can see in our classical test, how we write is we create a WebDriver, and then we initialize the WebDriver, and then we enter the username and passwords and things of that nature, right? So I'm going to do exactly the same thing this time as well. So if you just compare with my previous code that I have written for the login page, so if I go here, I have this so-called the username and password, and then I'm going to perform a login operation, and then I'm going to enter this guy and click the login button. I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but with a little change where I'm also going to return each and every of the classes out from it. So let me just copy these guys, and I'm going to just paste it over here. And now you can see that it looks pretty much like how it was looking even before. And I'm also going to copy these methods, and let me paste that over here. They look pretty much identical this time. But the problem with calling this particular methods is that every time while we just try to call this particular method, like login page, and then here I need to pass the web drivers and things. So I'm just gonna be passing that as well. As you can see, now I have this login page dot, and I have this enter username and password, which I can do that. Like I can just pass the username and the password here. And if I hit dot here, you can see that nothing basically happens because this particular method returns nothing. And even if you just try to hit a dot, it is not fluent enough to perform any operation there. That's how we were working all these days with a non-fluent based testing. But with the fluent based testing, what it does is this particular enter username and password, even though it is not going to be performing any operation, like it's not going to be calling a different page altogether, you can still return something called as this. And then for the void, you can just return the login page here in such a way that after that you can put a dot. You can still see there are some methods coming in like a chained operation. So once you enter the username and password, and then you can perform a click login operation. So you can keep on chaining this operation here. But after you click the login operation, the page which is going to be returned out from this particular stuff is not going to be the login page, right? Once you hit the login page, it's going to return you the home page. So basically you are returning the home page out from it. So in order for returning the home page, you should be doing something like return new of home page, and here you're going to pass the driver object that you have got. Of course, within the home page, we don't really have the drivers and all those stuff. So basically, I need to be adding those stuffs right now, right? And this is going to be very, very valid right now. So I can just say, once you click the login page, it is going to be the home page. Pretty cool. And now you can see that this particular click login page right now has turned out to be returning as the home page. So we can now just put something like a var of next page. I can even do further operation, something like once I click this, if I want to verify something like is the user has the initial something like that, I can even do that because it is returning the home page right now, right? So if I just go to the home page this time, I can create some public method which I can access right from this particular click login method itself, because this particular click login method returns as the home page. So too much of chaining can also return you the conflicts or even confusions. The too much of fluency will bring the problem. So the fluent way of writing the code should be based on the context instead of going beyond the context. So right now the context is very, very simple. We are working with the login page and we are working with the home page. But if you're going to keep on deep diving into much of the out of the scope context, then you are going to end up in the problems there. In order to keep things even simpler, I'm going to go to the home page this time for the initial. I'm actually going to perform an even further operation, something like this. Type the initial value and then it's going to return me as this, right? And then I can just next page dot, you can see that I get the type initial value because it's returning me the home page basically. And then I can just type Karthik here. But if I want to do an assertion, let's say once I type the value as Karthik there, and if I want to do an assert operation, like what is the value being typed or something like that, I'm actually be writing one more method within the home page. So before watching this particular step, if you don't really have an idea of how to work with tuples in C# 7.0, please go ahead and watch the C# for automation testing video series that I have released already in Udemy, which is currently available for free in YouTube. So please go ahead and watch there, so you can learn how to work with tuples and how things works. So that's exactly what I'm going to be discussing in this particular stuff. So basically, I'm going to be returning something called as homepage, and I'm going to return something called displayed. I'm going to say is user initial exist, and here I'm going to return two things. So because we have this tuples, I can return two value right from here. So txt initial dot displayed. So you can see this will return me the home page, and this displayed is going to return me the boolean, which is going to be over here, right? So now I have two things basically which I can verify along with that. So what I'm going to do is once I click this particular login operation here, I get this particular next page. So now you can see that I have this next page dot, once I hit dot, I get this is user initial exist. I can just call that, and if I hit dot, you can see I get displayed and the home page property. So this particular fields is actually coming from the tuples that I have already created. So in order to make things even more simpler, so once I click this particular login, I also need to say like is user initial exist or something like that. And then I'm going to say type the initial value. So I'm going to say next page dot homepage dot type initial value. So I'm just going to say Karthik, and then assert, I can just do is true or something like that. And I'm going to say next page dot displayed. So this value is going to be there or not. And then I'm going to say text box is not displayed. So basically it's not going to verify the text within the box, but rather it's going to verify the text box itself. So now if I just try to run this whole test, it is going to do exactly the same operation that you ever expect with a normal Selenium operation, but just that this time it's going to be more fluent. So the fluent means here you can frame the context of how the code should looks like and how it should be working. Oops, getting an error here. Oh yeah, because I don't really have the Chrome driver being installed. So let me install that and let me execute it now. So you can see that the Chrome browser is launched. It's entering the username and password. Oops, it's because of the click here. I think it should be submit. Do that again. Sorry for that. All right, and you can see that the value has been entered and it got passed. So now, as you can see, this is the Fluent way of writing the code. So basically you enter the text and you hit the dot, you get these stuffs, which is pretty much context for this particular login page. The click login and enter the username and password. So once you click the login and if you hit dot, now the context changes based on the stuff that you're working on. So here you expect this to have the is user initial exist. So if you just type like the is user initial exist, and then if you hit dot, then it says whether you want to return the home page or you want to see whether the control that you're looking for is being displayed or something like that. So you can keep on extending the way that you're writing the code using this Fluent way of writing the code. So all the codes written in LINQ is actually based on the Fluent interface. So once again, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope you really understand how the patterns are used in automation testing world. Thank you.